Hello, everybody, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm José.
I'm Mike.
And we have recently seen Red Sparrow.
Yeah.
Which I avoided going to at the movies. I don't know why. I think maybe it was the length and the bad reviews that might have stopped me from going.
I wanted to see it. I don't know why we didn't.
Yeah, I don't know why we didn't either, because I love Jennifer Lawrence. In any case, it passed us both by, and I just happened to see it at Tesco's the other day, and I picked it up, and within the first 5 minutes, I thought it was like the campest thing I'd ever seen.
It's got a great opening. So Red Sparrow is about a Russian dancer, ballet dancer, who suffers an accident. We'll get into the specifics. And can't dance anymore. Her uncle works in the SVR and uses her, who kind of basically brings her in, to be used as what they call sparrows. It's a construct for the film. It's not, sparrows are not a real.
It has a great cinematic legacy, though. We've seen that.
Oh yeah,
the
honeypot.
Yeah, from Russia with Love.
Yeah. So they are literally trained to be kind of sexual super spies, and they know exactly what their seductees want and how to fit into their lives and get what they want out of them. And that's what she is kind of turned into.
Yes.
Spoilers now coming up.
There are a few nuances to the plot that you've recounted that I want to elaborate upon. So, within the first 5 minutes, what happens is she's this prima ballerina, and she's dancing with Sergei Polunin, who, in my view, is the most exciting ballet dancer of the moment. He's just thrilling to watch. So, that's an extra plus in the film. But what happens is he's dancing with her on stage, and there's a fall. And the fall means that she loses her dancing career.
She has her right leg outstretched, and in one of these beautiful leaps, he jumps and lands straight on it and breaks her leg.
That's right. And then her uncle comes to see her and leaves her this phone, which is a conversation between her rival at the Bolshoi and the Sergei Polunin character, which makes it clear that it was deliberate. So she goes to confront them with her walking stick, finds them making love in the shower, and basically kind of bashes them silly. So now you have this very determined, focused person who doesn't have the resources to take care of her mother and keep her in the health care that the Bolshoi has thus far provided.
Yeah.
So that's just like the first 5 minutes, really. And I found it kind of fascinating because, of course, there's been all these stories about the Bolshoi. There were all these rivalries and people have thrown acid on each other's faces, and there's a whole kind of background to that. It resonates. In this film, it's a very minor point. Really.
Oh, yeah.
It's just kind of the beginning. But I thought I'd point it out because it's just so much fun to watch.
It's a great opening, and it starts this intrigue and sort of high drama, and it's also intercut with the American character who comes to the film later on, and so you have this as the music. I don't know what the ballet is, but as it's kind of building up, it's also building up this tension in what's happening with the American. You don't know what's happening there. There's some sort of spy thing, it's a chase and so on and so forth. So it builds. Basically, after the start, you're going, "Oh, I want to know what happens in the rest of this. This is great." And I think for the first hour, the film is really interesting. Actually, it was only when you see the high command of the SVR looking at a dashcam video of what happened in the park with the American spy that I realised it was set in the modern day. I think the film. I think this is deliberate. I think the film is basically trying to show the aesthetic is like 1970s Cold War Russia, right? The architecture and the colour and the lighting and even the costume. It's only when a bit of modern technology shows up in the film that you go, oh no, wait, this is set in 2016 or whatever. Actually, the film has this thing of saying that the Cold War never ended. Charlotte Rampling's character says this at one point, who's this kind of Russian matron who teaches all the girls to be sexual predators.
Fab.
She says the Cold War never ended, it just became fractured, fragmented, went into all these different places. And I think the film is quite deliberately portraying a kind of old school, stereotypical really, image of what you always thought Russia looked like. But it's sort of saying, but now it's still 2016, it's still like this.
Yes, I mean, the film has this contrast between Russia, which is basically seen as this totalitarian state, where kind of people in power have no care of people without power, except insofar as they're useful to them. Otherwise, they're instantly disposable, and the whole idea of personal freedom has no meaning whatsoever. Yeah, it's kind of a culture in which you're meant to serve. And it's contrasting that with America, in which the idea of personal freedom is, and I quote the Joel Edgerton character, still an aspiration, i.e. it might no longer exist either, but at least people aspire to that. So, that's basically kind of the dichotomy that the film places these characters in. And I think it's a very, very interesting film, actually.
Yeah. For that first hour.
I found it interesting until the end, really. So, there's a scene. So what happens is that the uncle basically sets her up.
Yeah.
Right. So she's meant to go and meet with this high official and basically take his phone, or get.
She's meant to swap it out so they can spy on him.
But in fact, the uncle arranges so that they kill the guy, and this is all without her consent. And then because she's a witness, basically, either she goes to this training school, which she later calls a horse school, or she dies. Yeah, so she's given no option but to be kind of a spy that uses her sexual allure and other skills. So there's like this montage where we see them picking locks and kind of getting all kinds of technical skills, and either she does that or she dies, basically. And those whole training sessions are quite brutal in a way, right? And also I thought very interestingly filmed. So there's quite a lot of nudity, and you see quite a lot of Jennifer Lawrence, but actually the people who you see entirely frontally nude are the men in that academy, which I think is it's a very interesting contrast. And it's all about power, really, and manipulation and so on. I thought, that was kind of interesting. And of course, some people are broken by that. And after, she gets trained, and without really finishing her training, she's sent on a mission, which is to find this American guy, get him to fall for her, and find out who...
He has a mole in the high command in Russia,
That's
and they
right.
want to know who it is.
That's right.
So she has to find out who that is. The plot gets a little bit convoluted, and that's one of the problems I have with it. Is by the end of the film, it's all over the place as to exactly who's doing what. And it's a problem that a lot of films in the spy genre have, I think, which is where you don't really know who to trust and when to trust them, and you should be suspicious of everything everyone says. And up to a point, that serves the film, because it puts you in this place of the right level of confusion at the right time. But by the end of the film, when Jeremy Irons, who's one of the high command in the SVR, comes to Jennifer Lawrence and says, "I'm the mole." He says, "I'm the mole, and the reason I'm the mole is because being born in Russia is like being born into a prison, and America has more freedom or whatever it is, and actually he makes quite an American sort of argument, because what Americans like to say when they're criticising their government is, love the country, hate the government. It's what the government's doing to the country is what's wrong, but the country is great," which is asinine. But that's the argument that Jeremy Irons makes in this, is basically what these people are doing to Russia is what I hate, but I love my country, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. But the point is, he's coming out to her as the mole, and even then, basically he's telling the truth. And I'm going, what's he up to? Because also the Russians have been so suspicious of Jennifer Lawrence at this point that I'm thinking, what if Jeremy Irons is coming to her saying he's the mole? Because what he says is, I'm not long for this world. I reckon the Russians are about to find out who I am. So you give me in, right? You say I found them all. It's Jeremy Irons. Then you will be praised and you will get my job, and you're so much better at this than I am that you'll be able to continue my work with the Americans for a long, long time.
Yeah.
What if he's coming to her saying that and being dishonest and saying, if she gives me up, then that proves that she's a baddie and we will offer.
I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking exactly that he was right.
See, I think the film has no way of distinguishing between what you're supposed to believe and what you are.
No, I think it does, because you only have a star like Jeremy Irons in that little role if it's going to carry some weight, and I fully expected that.
No. I had problems with that. I think that it gets to the point where it's too convoluted, and then, mind you, the twist at the end after that is good when it turns out she's framed her uncle.
Yes.
That's nice.
Yes.
And she's a bit of a bitch. But what I wanted really, right, I think that first hour, until basically she's sent on her big mission, the first hour is her being taken into the school and being taught all this stuff. And what that promised was, it built this really brilliant, really convincing sort of totalitarian world in which your body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the state and it's on loan. And you don't have any... I mean, there was this thing about how, like, this film apparently was supposed to be Jennifer Lawrence sort of reclaiming her body after the nude photos leaked and things.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting, considering that this film makes a point of her body not belonging to her and her body being used as a tool by other people. I mean, the film kind of fits into erotic thriller territory, but it has higher aspirations than erotic thrillers tend to do.
And also it's not sexy enough.
Well, that's it. I also think it's unclear of how much it wants to titillate. Yeah. But it does have this thing of saying, like, Jennifer Lawrence's character is a victim and she's being forced to do this, but isn't she sexy though?
Yeah. Well,
it has its cake and eats it.
She's a star.
But what that totalitarian world building promises, I hope for, is an ending, like a 1984 ending, right? The end of 1984, the state completely wins. Yeah? And Winston Smith is brainwashed and he goes back to society and he loves Big Brother. And what I wanted at the end of this was, it was obviously we're going to get this thing with the American of giving her a way out of Russia. And I thought, if that's what happens, then it's going to be asinine and adenine and a tonic and all this stuff about how America can still win and stuff. And I think in real life, America has already lost, because Russia is so much more ruthless and has no limits on what it'll do, which is why they go poisoning people in cheap cafes in Salisbury. And it's obvious that they're, it's the high command doing this, and they go, who cares? And the film makes a point of saying, it has this thing of Joel Edgerton going, I would never make you do that. We have limits on what we'll do. But I think what the film should be saying ultimately is that is why America isn't going to win, because America has these limits.
But I don't agree with you. But
of course, that's not what happens.
I think it's a good thing that that's not what happens. And I don't agree with that analysis at all. My main problem with the film was that it's very poorly directed. So, what's his name, the director?
I don't know.
It's something like Fred Williamson or
Francis Lawrence. He's done three of the Hunger Games.
Okay, Francis Lawrence. And I remember criticizing this in the Hunger Games, like, there's nothing to look at. If you look at the films, the Red Sparrow, it's almost all shot in close-ups or medium close-ups, right? And it's a film, so the film kind of, in a way, really does nothing visually. It also kind of doesn't know how to create sexiness. It's not sexy, and yet it is meant to be an erotic thriller. So kind of the sex part is at least as important as the thriller part, and I think it kind of fails at both, actually. In that sense, the film is a disappointment, and I think what carries it for me is actually the plot. So the basic premise, the idea, the concept, the plot, and then the actors. Because I think she's phenomenal, Jennifer Lawrence, in this.
It's definitely the actors, and the thing that carried it for me was the promise of what the plot would be after that first hour. The second hour was all... The reason I stayed with it was because I was hoping for a good ending, which I didn't get.
What I was imagine what somebody like Brian De Palma could do with this material. You know,
Yeah.
it would have been sexy, it would have been exciting, it would have been thrilling, it would have been fantastic to look at. You know,
Yeah.
kind of, he'd have had amazing shot sequences, and you know, and so on and so forth. And really, kind of, this works purely as a star vehicle for Jennifer Lawrence. But, you know, I think she's worth it. She's amazing. You know, she's constantly interesting no matter what she does. Though I also do think that, you know, I was reading some reviews, and there's a very famous one by Manolo Dargis from the New York Times, you know, just talking about how great Jennifer Lawrence is in this. And I think it kind of also loses the point because it's got an absolutely amazing cast, right? It's like Jolie Richardson is the mother. Mary Louise Parker is like, you know, this American, this person who's wanting to sell American secrets. And then it's got Jeremy Irons and Shonayers, who's fantastic. Corian Hines. Like, it's almost like you know, she's surrounded by this incredible group of people, of which, you know, the only really disappointing one for me is Edgerton. I think he only does one note. He can be very good, but if he's not doing earnest, he can't do it. And actually, you know, this film calls for something more stylized, and kind of more theatrical, you know. So
Yeah.
he's really like, he plays it like he could have been a farmer, you know, in danger of his crop or something, in like some farm drama, you know, kind of. This is not that kind of film, and it calls for a different type of acting, you know. So
And you know, the campy thing is true. It's like, you know, when you have half the cast doing silly Russian accents and talking
Yes.
like this, like that should be the tenor of the film.
Yes.
It is a bit silly.
Yes.
It's quite silly. And, you know, despite the fact it has some real darkness underneath it for a long time, it's also should be seen, which is why I think that you know, that ending that I want would be perfect. If this is supposed to be a kind of pulpy 90s erotic thriller silly thing, then having an ending in which it turns out that Jennifer Lawrence has genuinely been brainwashed and is now going to be king of the Russians would be amazing. That would be the perfect way to end it.
no, I like the ending, and actually, if it had been better made, there would have been room for lots of sequels, you know, which I think would have been brilliant. But just to go on the note about performance, you know, just to say that my measure for this, you know, is Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right?
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
You know, the stars are charming. It's slightly tongue in cheek. You know, it's kind of, you know, they're giving star performances in which kind of they are always doing something interesting. You know, that's not realistic. That's kind of almost like, you know, very stylized and very enjoyable and kind of tongue in cheek and very glamorous and sexy. And, you know, these are not meant to be your neighbors next door. The film is not about that. You know, so I think it calls for that type of heightened performance style, and Joel Edgerton doesn't.
Edgerton doesn't reach that at all. No. You're right. He's probably the worst thing about the film. But so what ending? So you said you disagreed with my analysis of what the film could be saying or should be saying. So what do you like about the ending and the film the way it is?
I thought the ending was a complete surprise. You know, because like there's a whole thing throughout the film about kind of double crossings, right? So, you know, there's this initial thing where he's being tortured and she joins in his torture, and you wonder, you know, how that's going to develop and what's going to happen. And then there's the trade-off at the end where, you know, you're waiting for one person to be traded off, and, you know, the person that's traded off is in fact her uncle. So, you know, which I loved because basically she gets her revenge on him. And then basically what ends up happening is that she now becomes part of the establishment in Russia, and rather than having one mole, they have two, right? So there's the possibility for all kinds of operations to take place kind of within the Kremlin, you know. So I thought that was brilliant.
I think it was completely unambitious. I think the ending is really unambitious. Like I say, I think it's in this perfect place to do something really silly and really weird and really dark. And it just goes, America wins. Welcome to the welcoming arms of America. You are now a mole for us. I really want her to be genuinely brainwashed, and for there to be a pit in your stomach at the end. You go, oh shit, we lost. This is the perfect.
You could never imagine that with the film the way that it is.
I disagree. I was imagining it all the way through.
Well, I don't understand why you were imagining such a silly thing.
Because it was a silly film.
Even within the bounds of that silliness, you would never get it. This is a film in which the whole culture has been against her, kind of like right from the beginning. It's kind of. It's deprived her of her art, it's forced her into prostitution, it's forced her into killing people, and so on. And then you want the film to have her brainwashed into kind of thinking that that's the greatest thing ever?
Yeah, because that proves how evil it is.
Oh, imagine how much bigger a hit the film would have been if actually Joel Edgerton had rescued her and, they'd gotten the mother out and started a new life in America, which is really the ending that you expect. So actually, for me, this was a surprise ending. This added a level of darkness that's not there, which is, I think maybe why the film didn't do as well as it could have. Because, what you expect is kind of, a romantic conclusion that's also a complete extraction from that place. So to bring her back to that place is quite dark. Aside from everything, the lovers are separated. So, in terms of a thriller and a romance, it defies, expectation in those two ways.
Not enough.
Well,
I do like a lot of it. Like I said, I think it I know. I wish I had seen it at the cinema, because I think that first half of the film is really good and would have been even better there. There's this thing of, as you said, it is all about power. There's this thing actually I noticed. It's discarded for the rest of the film, but it happens in that opening hour. It's this power stance, which is leaning back on it. First time it's a bed, second time it's a desk. It's leaning back, and leaning back on your arms outstretched,
yes,
and your legs spread, and it's this sexual power stance.
Yes.
And the first time you see it is when J-Law is in the hotel room with the guy who she's there to swap the phone off. He says, "Take off your clothes." And he sits there on the bed with his. I mean, it's actually quite unnatural. His legs being spread like that. It's not quite. It looks a bit weird, and it's clearly been done for this purpose. So it will be reflected later on when they do it a second time. So he sits there with his arms back and his legs spread, and he's the one who has all the power in this, and it becomes a rape scene that she is then rescued from by the guy who comes in and murders the guy. And then you get into the sex school, and Charlotte Rampling keeps on trying to get them to fuck in front of the class, basically. And there's this whole thing in there about your body not belonging to you. You're doing this for a purpose. You have to give yourself. You basically have to give your body to the state
and your mind. Otherwise, it's not believable. So you have to give yourself wholly to it. Is what Charlotte Rampling keeps saying.
Yeah. So there's one scene in the middle of it where they're introduced to a load of soldiers, young soldiers who've come back from wherever. They've been stationed abroad, and Charlotte Rampling says, "Welcome them back," and J-Law goes off with this young one, and you see them in the hotel room, and then it cuts to everyone's watching it on this cinema screen, which is great. I don't really see that coming. The idea, I mean, it has this thing of you are being watched all the time.
Yes.
And they're analysing what she did in front of the class. And Charlotte Rampling says, you said all the right things, you did that and the other, you did really well, but you picked a young guy because you knew that you wouldn't have to give yourself to him, and that's what you need to get your head around.
Well, it's evident in that scene that she did not only pick a young guy, she picked a gay guy.
Oh, was it? I didn't really pick
that. So,
Well, I suppose he was certainly very nervous around it, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. So that she wouldn't have to go through with it. So, which demonstrates two things. One, Charlotte Rampling's point, but the other one, how smart she is, to kind of maneuver herself out of these situations.
That's in the middle, and then, and so you've had that, and then what comes back is that there's one of her classmates, he's kind of a rival, he clearly doesn't like her, tries to rape her in the shower, and she beats him up, and that leads to this thing which is like the culmination of that whole section of the film, which is where they're in the class and basically they're trying to get them to fuck again, but it's this thing of give him what he wants. That's the point, of give him what he wants. And so the guy comes in and he says turn round, and she says no, and she disrobes and she in front of him, and so she's completely naked, and she gets on the desk in that power stance that the guy was doing right at the start, and she spreads her legs, and it's this really intimidating sort of thing, and he can't get it up, and he calls her a bitch, and he leaves, and she says what he wanted was power. That's what she denied him, and so that's the culmination of this whole thing. I think, and that was, God, it was so interesting, and I think apart from the fact that it was kind of, I think it was a bit tame on the sex, because it doesn't want to go full R18.
It wasn't tame on the sex. It just wasn't very sexy.
Okay, yeah. But apart from that, it's portrayal of sex and learning to kind of take control of your sexuality, but also it's not really take control; it's use it for someone else's benefit. And it was really dark. And really,
it was very dark and very interesting,
and it just throws it away.
But for me, it raises kind of very interesting questions about cinema in general. One is, they're both interrelated, really. So because this is like an erotic thriller, spy film, and if you imagine the lead being a man instead of a woman, you imagine two things. One, the sexual element would have been completely de-emphasized, right? So, there is something kind of disconcerting about Jennifer Lawrence constantly being put under sexual threat. Like she's raped, or there's attempts at raping her. There's several in this film, actually, 3 or 4. Which is kind of, you never have Brad Pitt kind of going through this. So there's that element. And then the other element, which you often get in these spy thrillers, and which I found having a female star raises different questions. Two things, first of all. First, there's always like this trope where the hero gets captured and tortured, right? It's a staple of the James Bond films. When it happens to a woman, it feels weird. Right, kind of, the torture scenes feel, they are obviously gendered, but it's uncomfortable viewing, in a way, that I don't feel when I watch.
I didn't find that, I must say.
Well, I do. It kind of, there's something about a female star being tortured, in ways that are often sexual. That it raises interesting questions, because one of the things is you can't just put a woman in the middle of like a genre like that without making other alterations, really. So this trope of the hero being tortured, it has a different meaning when it's a woman who's being tortured, and connected to this, which I thought was, a fault in the film, and also the reason why maybe it didn't work very well. The director couldn't figure out a way of showing the female star doing action in a way that was entertaining and believable, and very different, for example, than, when Scarlett Johansson did it in, I forget what the film is called, but that, that it felt like a...
Like the Avengers or something else?
No, not the Avenger.
Lucy?
Lucy.
Or Atomic Blonde?
Or in Atomic Blonde. Those would be two good examples in which, kind of both of those stars kind of are shown, very interestingly doing action in a way that also, that they use their sexuality. This kind of, this feels different for me.
Yeah, I mean, considering I've only watched the first Hunger Games film, which obviously he's kind of been in charge of a bunch of them, and if the rest of them are as sort of bland in the action as this is, then really what's the draw?
Yes. Well, the draw is Jennifer Lawrence and the books in that world, but actually, you could imagine somebody doing a much, much better job on all of those films than he did, and actually that's my criticism of this as well. Like I said, you just kept hoping that someone like Brian De Palma would have directed it, really.
I feel like that with most films, I think. Just imagine what Brian De Palma would have done.
Well, that's true. But also, what's his name who did Lucy?
Luc Besson.
Luc Besson would have done something kind of, very entertaining with this, right?
Yeah.
And this does feel kind of bland and unskilled. And I want to highlight the unskilled thing, because I feel that in spite of the production values and the budget, and actually quite a magnificent cast that does wonders, it still feels a little bit to me like a TV movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I just found out he didn't direct the first Hunger Games. That was directed by Gary Ross.
Okay.
He did sequels.
Right.
He did I Am Legend, which I have seen.
I have not seen that.
Which was also not good enough.
Right. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And Constantine.
I kind of like that. I like Constantine.
I never saw it.
Actually.
Is that Kate Beckinsale?
No, it's Keanu Reeves.
I'm thinking of something else then, clearly.
Check it, because I might be wrong, but I think it is Keanu.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves, Rachel Weisz, Shia LaBeouf, Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, so I like that. But actually,
Kate Beckinsale in Underworld or something. Can't remember. Anyway.
I think we've been going on so long about the faults that kind of we're losing sight of the virtues. So I just want to go through them again. Basically, I thought the whole scene at the beginning was just fantastic. A great opening. I thought the scenes at that sex school, the Red Sparrow school, I thought that was equally kind of, interesting. And then there are all of these things about how she maneuvers men who are meant to be her superior, so when she's stationed in Budapest and so on, that I think are kind of, very interesting as well. And then actually the whole episode with Mary Louise Parker, I thought was wonderful.
Yeah, the aide to the senator, chief of staff for a senator who's selling info to the Russians.
That's right.
So that's where the film really started to get too convoluted for me, though. Like, as much as I liked the tenor of what was going on, the plot is starting to get so complex that I actually started to lose me quite severely.
Well, I think that's probably true. But I also wanted to highlight the darkness and how unusual it is to see that in a big budget kind of American studio film. I mean, because the film has the film has things that you can't put your finger on, and some of them you can, but that are very dark. So, for example, the mother tells her, "I've always tried to keep your uncle away from you," right? Because he was too interested in you when he was a child. So, there's a suggestion of pedophilia, of incest, right? Then also at the end with the mother, I had a moment of doubt as to whether she actually knew all that was going on and whether she might have been in on it or something. Yeah.
Right.
Like, yeah. How because.
Well, that's a bit like me and Jeremy Irons going, I don't know who should be trusted.
Yes. Yes. So. I think that's quite it's quite amazing for, the leading star of her generation to kind of accept this role and kind of, give herself to it in the way that she does. And she is just phenomenal, I think. Like the accent wavers all over the place, but she's developed kind of a look and a posture and a way of moving and a kind of a blank stare in which, you get the sense that she's constantly weighing things and she's not giving anything away, that I think is kind of quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's true. Like I say, I still wish the ending was mad and dark, but the way that the ending is, I think there is some I love the twist element to it. I think it works really well. I always just want things to be more mad.
Yeah, well, get real. Well, I think when she looks back, to him, it's basically, I've supported you. Yeah, like you kind of, because he instantly realizes that's not his mole, right? So his mole is safe, and she's done it for him.
but there's also an element of like no one saw that coming. You know,
well, that's true. No one saw that coming.
Who's she to be trusted?
But she is to be trusted because she's done it for her, and that's why, you know, the phone call at the end has the resonance that it does.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in love. No one.
Funny how you're so schmaltzy about everything except romantic love.
Well, get real, in your words.
All right, shall we wrap it up here? I recommend that people see it. I'm sorry I missed it on the big screen, and I'm very glad to have seen it on DVD.
Yeah, I'm glad I've seen it. I think, you know, that like I said, that whole first hour, everything up until she leaves the school, is brilliant. It's really, really good. And after that, when it becomes more traditional spy-y, what's actually going to happen in the real world type thing, it starts to lose me. But the ending does bring it back a bit.
Also, aside from everything else, it's just an opportunity to see the greatest female star of the moment be great. You know, so actually I think it's worth seeing for that alone.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on iTunes, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And we welcome your feedback, so please do get in touch with us if you have any thoughts on this film that we might not have covered.
It's all right, Red Sparrow, isn't it, really?
Yes.
It's all right.
It's all right.
It is.
All right, thank you very much.